Good morning, everyone. Welcome, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome, guests. Welcome to our first session of the 2020 Annual District 4 Conference. Our guest speaker today, Scott Stiefvater, has been coaching business leaders to speak with confidence, power, and authenticity for almost a decade. He has led presentation workshops for Duarte Incorporated, the global leader in presentation development and design, and has trained teams and individuals from over 100 companies, including Eli Lilly, Kaiser, Apple, Capital One, and Viacom. Please help me in welcoming our guest speaker today, Scott Stiefvater. Scott.
Hey, Ken, how are you?
Doing good.
Good,
Just
good,
sheltering in place.
Yes, yes. Aren't we all? Almost all of us.
So, Scott, just for our audience, let them know that we're going to do this as a question and answer period. I'll be talking to you, and we're just going to make it a conversation rather than an actual presentation. So I think what I want to do is start with the premise of your actual talk today. I mean, what you'll be presenting is presentation, how to be fully present when you present. And before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work as a presentation coach?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll give you my story a little bit, and that'll be a great way of introducing what I do. You mentioned I worked at Duarte, and many of our listeners today will know of Nancy Duarte. She's a thought leader in the presentation area, and she's written great books. And I enjoyed working for her and her wonderful organization for 6 years. But I would get this question that would come up often in workshops. Someone would say, occasionally I speak to a leadership team, a leadership group, and I'm deathly afraid of being interrupted. And they'll interrupt me. Scott, what do I do to not be interrupted? And at the time, I would always think, well, it's about the script that you've worked on. Let's work on your script. And what I mean by that is, let's work on your slides, maybe rearrange things, maybe shorten the script, maybe just move things around and tweak things, and you'll be okay. Now, later, after leaving Duarte, I ended up working with a wonderful man named Danny Slomoff, who has a brain-based kind of approach to speaking, and it dawned on me. Maybe the script's the problem. Maybe it's because when people show up to these leadership group type of presentations, that they have a script in their mind and they think, wow, I've perfected this script and I've rehearsed it really carefully. So I've really got to try to deliver it perfectly. In the meantime, the leaders on the other side, their mind is totally dynamic. Their mind is ever changing. They're thinking about some very provocative thoughts about what the presenter is presenting to them. And they want to have a conversation. So what I came to recognize is that our minds are really designed when we talk for conversation, not so much for the way we think of presentations in the mainstream, which is it's really more of a one-way thing.
Okay, what you're making me think of is years ago, I read in the Dale Carnegie books, one of the lines that I loved at it was, the best speech is not a speech, it's a conversation. And that sounds a lot of like what you're talking about. It's the idea of it being a two-way communication, a conversation, not talking at someone.
Yeah, and it's even a little bit more nuanced than that, because we tend to think of a conversation as this very mechanical model. I talk, you listen, you talk, I listen. And what I'm talking about is something even more nuanced and different than that. That I believe great speakers, even if it's a TED-like talk where you're on a stage and the rules of the game pretty much say the audience can't talk back, that there's still this constant exchange. In other words, you'll think about, what do I want to say now? And you'll say it. But a great speaker moves from being in their head and thinking about the idea they want to transfer to the audience to focusing on the audience themselves and listening to the audience, not with their ears, but with their eyes.
Yeah.
So it's constant. I mean, your awareness for just microseconds may have to go into your head to say, what am I going to say? But I think the greatest speakers can move in between being in their head and thinking about their ideas or scripts or whatever they want to transfer to their audience to, oh, how is my audience receiving what I'm saying? They read not only their body language, but what I call their face language. And they let that affect them. That's the important part. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. If you're not aware of your audience, you could be taking them off in a different place. If they're not connecting with you, you've lost your audience. And how do you know unless you're really paying attention to your audience?
Right.
I mean, I've had that. I've had those moments of being in my head, trying to remember what I had memorized and completely lost touch with my audience.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that as long as the foundational idea of public speaking or presentations includes this script thing, most people are taught to take a Band-Aid approach to it. So they'll say, well, I do Q&A. I just put this Q&A at the end and then I can have the conversation. And then I'll say, well, Q&A is kind of this Band-Aid approach to just protecting your script. It just means I'm going to stay linear and locked with my plan. And then I'm going to allow for what's more natural and spontaneous, which is this constant exchange of light and sound between speaker and listener.
Expanding on that a little bit, one of the things in your write-up for this presentation, you talk about writing as the technology that gets in our way when we speak. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. We vilified PowerPoint for a long time, death by PowerPoint, the misuse and overuse of slides. And it's not to say that that's not a problem, but upon reflection, I've done a lot of reading and research. I've come to believe that the real culprit, the technological culprit, is writing. That presumes first that writing is in fact a technology, and it is. Really, in the scope of human history, writing is a very recent phenomenon. It's an innovation. And it was even 200 years ago, I think, only about 15% of the world's population actually lived in a society where there was reading and writing. There's still societies today that do not have reading and writing. They don't have the technology. And then what happens is in our society, which has reading and writing, we're a literate society. Those of us who grew up in it, reading and writing, we go through our school system and we're taught writing is very fundamental. We begin to develop a certain set of attitudes and thinking habits that come with that. So the part of that is the idea of a write and recite approach to presentations. When we're going to give a presentation, we know it's important. So we want to be really careful, right? Sometimes we're very nervous about presentations because we know that it has a lot to do with our reputation and our standing in the tribe, so to speak. So what's more careful when it comes to language than writing? Writing is a careful process, generally speaking, right? It's slow. We can carefully choose our words. We can go back and revise and edit and perfect everything. And then that way, when we actually speak, we can deliver a really perfect script. But the problem is we're stuck in the past. We created the slides. We conceived the script a day ago or a week ago or even months ago, but our audience is sitting there in the present. They want to have a relationship with us. They're learning in the moment from us, yet we're strangely separated from them because we're in our mind going, what's the next slide? What was my script? Is that the right connection? Am I making the connection there?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like I've said, I think most of our audience, most of the people here have been there. They've been in that place to where you're locked into your script, you're locked into your slides, and it's almost like audience be damned. I'm getting through these slides, whether they want to see them or not.
Yes.
So it's a sad thing to happen, but it does happen. I spent many years as a technical trainer, and I trained best when I was reacting to the moment of what the students were asking and what they needed, rather than, no, I have this linear set of slides to go through, these schematics we've got to get through, and I've got 5 days to deal with it. And that's when I would fail as an instructor, rather than reacting to them in the moment.
Right. Well, isn't it funny? Because if your goal becomes, God, I just want to get through my content,
Mm-hmm.
then there's all this anxiety about time. So you focus on quantity. You said you set the number of slides, essentially the number of words that have to come out your mouth. And then you realize in the moment, your mind wants to be conversational. So you naturally leave the script. Suddenly you're obsessed with, oh my God, am I going to get through to the last slide? Am I going to get through my content?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll find people actually speed up, and the quality of delivery goes way down because they're so obsessed with quantity.
Right.
I can't tell you how freeing it is, even in this talk we have right now, not to have the burden of trying to get through my content.
Right.
So I can focus on you, and I can focus on quality. I mean, I want to be alive and vibrant and present with you in this moment, because this is a unique event. I can't replicate this. I don't want to replicate this.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving on from that, as far as time,
Yeah,
one of the things I wanted to do is just bring up, remind our audience that if they have questions, please submit them by email. We had looked at using the chat on YouTube, but it required you to have a YouTube account. So please, if you have any questions you'd like to ask Scott, please send them to the email address webinar@d4tm.org. Again, that's webinar@d4tm.org. Okay, so moving back into it, Scott, you and I, before we actually got into the session, we had met a few moments, and we were talking about how all this applies to today, what's happening to all of us as we shelter in place and have different ways to communicate.
Yeah.
I had mentioned that I was never enamored with video chat, but some of my friends know I've been stuck on the East Coast for 2.5 months. I haven't seen my family since mid-February, and I'm starting to connect with them through video chat. So I can see a lot of what we're talking about relates directly to that, that you're actually, you're having that conversation. So you have any thoughts about how this can apply to what's going on today?
Yeah. I think of two online experiences. So you go on to a Zoom meeting with a potential client, and you bring along with you a big deck. Maybe there's a lot of people on the call, so they're all in these tiny little windows, and you turn your slide on and it dominates the screen, and you're this small little box in the corner, and you're going through and you're sort of stuck with this script. I think many people will validate this, many people in our audience, this new idea that's come up called Zoom fatigue, where a lot of people are working from home and they're doing it a lot through Zoom, and they're doing it particularly in those kind of contexts where there's a lot of people on screen and the connection is incredibly weak. I don't just mean the kind of technical problems we have in Zoom where suddenly somebody's internet signal gets a little weak and that sort of stuff. Even that's a problem. But another experience is what the one you and I are having right now, or the one that you have had with your wife and Zooming and calling with her. And you're big on my screen right now. And I can see the details of your face language. I can really connect with you. Zoom is incredible. Just 2 weeks ago, I was having a Zoom meeting much like this one with somebody in Transylvania. And they might as well have been next door because I couldn't tell. And what's essential to this and why this is so important is because the principles of talking don't change a lot, even though we're doing this in a very artificial environment. Great speaking is the exchange of sound and light. And this video conferencing stuff that all of us are doing, it's kind of like a conference call, but with light. And that light is very valuable, not just because you can see me as the speaker, right? It's because I can see you as my listener, and I can entrain with you. I can begin to react to you and let you affect me. And our conversation can be spontaneous and unpredictable, very natural. Does that?
Okay. Definitely see that. I just want to remind people again, questions. I don't want to make this entirely myself asking the questions. I don't see any coming up yet. So please, somebody take a moment and send us an email with your questions for Scott. Let me move on. Well, let's bring us back to Toastmasters.
Yeah.
Everything we've talked about so far, how do you think that would relate to the Toastmasters audience, which is the majority of the people who've signed in today?
Yeah. Well, in Toastmasters, so I've attended a few meetings, and the meetings that I attended had two speaking opportunities. There was somebody who was scheduled to speak, and in my experience, they got up and they were in a sort of write and recite kind of modality, generally speaking, which was they came with a set of slides and they had a carefully thought out script, so to speak, and they delivered it. And then there was the part of the meeting where something was more spontaneous. People were given a cue, a prompt, and asked to just speak for 30 seconds spontaneously on something. And I found that very interesting. What I find is that people who come to Toastmasters, many are there because they're nervous and anxious about speaking, and they don't feel that they have very good speaking skills. So on the continuum of mastery of speaking, they're generally early in the spectrum, right? Early in that continuum. And they work in Toastmasters and develop their skills, and it's fantastic. They get better and better and better. But at some point, if your Toastmasters participants stay stuck in the write and recite modality, their progress stops. They become trapped to an extent because they haven't been allowed to say, release the script, say, I'm going to begin to trust myself now to be much more spontaneous in how I approach this. And when people are able to do that, the clients that I work with, it allows them to reach a whole nother level.
Right.
Does that?
Oh, definitely. There are many, many Toastmasters who tell you the way to do it is write a speech and practice it again and again and memorize every moment. And unfortunately for me, that does not work. Those are my worst speeches. That's when I fail, is when it's totally memorized. Yeah. And I have had the problem of freezing because I've forgotten the next word.
Yeah.
I mentioned, I don't remember if I told you, but I told somebody else recently. At one point, I was on the board of directors for Toastmasters, and it was something I had to campaign for and had to travel all over California and Hawaii and a few other places to give a 2-minute speech about why I should be on the board of directors. It went fine until I hit one spot in Southern California. I got my first sentence out, and then the mind went blank. And I don't know how long I stood there, but it was really sad because I lost that thread. And I couldn't go forward, and I wasn't quick enough to just pick up with just ideas.
Yeah.
And that's and I've learned from that. And yes, there is a certain amount of, for myself, I'll write phrases that I want to try to come back to,
right.
But it's more like an outline of where I want to go and be ready to throw the outline away if that's what works. And those are my best presentations.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, look, common wisdom would say, well, Ken, you should have rehearsed a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But what you're doing is trying to become a perfect recording of yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely.
You create a script, something from, in that case, weeks or months earlier. You created this script of some kind, right?
Right.
And then you were saying, God, the effort right here is I've got to be the perfect recording of that script. And if I do that, I'm going to be successful. But now your problem was at some point, because my mind just couldn't do it. And I'll tell you, it's because memorizing a script is weird to the mind.
Mhm.
Actors have to work on that skill. It's not natural, right? So it doesn't surprise me that at some point you had this thing where, we call it some of us call it a brain fart, where
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I'm stuck. I can't remember my script. Everything's falling apart, and you freak out. And
Mhm.
then when the common wisdom says, well, rehearse more, suddenly we're spending all this energy and anxiety and worry about our script. What if you'd thrown out the script?
Yeah.
Now, the other part to that, let me give you another example. Being a speaking coach, of course, I talk about a lot of different aspects of speaking. And let's say I've prepared a presentation about in-person on stage sort of delivery. And then 3 months ago, this presentation may have really landed very well with the audience to a degree, right? Let's say I've created a script, I have slides, and I give them a presentation about things like being grounded on your feet as you stand, and producing straight lines and aspects of posture when you're standing, or movement on stage. Now, think about today during this pandemic, where nobody is doing that kind of speaking.
Mhm.
If I am locked to that script, now I show up, my listeners are in the present, they're dynamic, they are ever changing. They're no longer concerned with posture on stage. They're concerned with something totally different. But the script handcuffs me and keeps me from being with them in that moment. Now that's an extreme example, this pandemic thing, but it's a very visceral and vivid example of what happens when you are in a write and recite mainstream presentation mode,
Mhm.
when you're stuck in that paradigm, and what it does to keep you from connecting with your audience. And even in a normal situation, that happens. You'll go into an audience and you'll give the same presentation the same way one day that you did just the day before. The day before it was a smashing hit. And then today, for some reason, it doesn't sit with the audience. It doesn't fall with it. Why? Because they're different individuals.
Mhm.
Time has changed. Maybe it's late in the day for this audience, so they're a little more tired. Well, if I don't see that, I don't sense that from them, if I'm not aware of their face language and body language, if I'm not letting them affect me, I simply can't be the best speaker I can be.
Got it.
Yeah.
Definitely got it. I have a question, so I have to lean forward to another computer to read this. So I was watching the webinar, and then an over reliance on writing, which sticks us in the past, sounds like a mindfulness principle. Does either speaker practice meditation or mindfulness? I got to get the rest of that. Any suggestions on bringing that into their daily lives?
Oh
And
my
that's
God,
a
I love
question
it.
from Catherine.
What a wonderful comment, because sometimes I try to figure out, how do I describe what I do, and what separates me from other speaking coaches, and mindfulness is really central to it. I have dreams. I have yet to do this, but my dream, when all of this pandemic stuff is over and we can once again gather in groups together, and really, really enjoy one another's physical company, I'm planning on doing speaking retreats. And as part of those speaking retreats, I do want to do all sorts of mindfulness exercises. One might be, I was just thinking the other day, go grab a piece of fruit, maybe an apple. And I want you to cut that apple, and I want you to taste it. But I want you to do it very, very carefully. I want you to really, really raise your senses, raise your awareness of that apple, how it looks, how it smells, how it tastes. Now, some people will say, when I do that, I realize I've never really, really tasted an apple. I've never really experienced it that way.
Mhm.
And I'll say, you know what? That's the same way with this type of speaking that I advocate. until you really release yourself from the mainstream paradigm. That includes that, the part of it that includes that scripting idea. It's hard to understand what it's like to really present and be present. It's wonderful. It's part of what's getting me through this pandemic thing. That in these conversations with people like you, I enjoy the connection. I'm not worried just about me and how I look and what words are coming out of my mouth. I am concerned about you. And is this affecting you? Are you getting the ideas I'm trying to transfer to you? There's something wonderfully generous and humble and mindful about the experience. I don't know. I hope I answered the question well, or addressed the question.
I would think so, definitely. We have one that you covered a little bit, but let me go ahead and read it because you might be able to go a little deeper. It says, we need to learn to present over Zoom.
Yeah.
How do we translate this interactive conversational approach to an entire presentation? And it looks like it's from Liesel. It's hard to read from here, but I think maybe expand a little bit on what you already spoke about this difference with working with a Zoom world.
Right. Well, you know what? I'm going to use our talk today as an example. You know, when you and I first started talking about this, there was an open-ended question. You know, how is this particular event going to look? Was Scott going to show up with a bunch of slides and a script and talk through everything? And the good news is that you trusted me, Ken. You trusted me, and I said, you know, let's not do that. Let's do what we're doing right here. Let's create a conversation. So in the larger sense, if you have the power and you can control the interface of a given Zoom presentation, if people will allow you to let you persuade them to do something more like this, as opposed to the traditional, go through my slides, I'm a small little square in the corner type of experience, then I would say do it. It assumes that you're willing to release the idea of the script and trust yourself to know what to say, know what you want to say. And some people have a hard time making that transition. So that's part of it. But I would say, if you can make that switch and say, you know what, instead of presenting slides, let's just take somebody who represents the audience and have them speak to me and me speak to them. And so there'll be a much more rich, spontaneous kind of experience. Now, should I add some more? I've got.
No, we're doing good. We're only a half hour in, so we have plenty of time ahead of us.
Well, so let me add to that but Ken, I want to be fair. Sometimes people don't have that control.
Right.
And what I would say is, if you don't have that kind of control and you're still expected to show up with slides and things like this, to me, it's your internal setting, your mindset, which is really important. You still may show slides. You still may be a small square in the corner of the screen for your listeners. But if your mindset is still one of being present, then there's ways that you adjust your behavior so you're not as locked in linear.
Right.
You may have to do some compromising. Well, I'm still showing slides, but you know what? Somehow I've read my listeners and I feel like going through the next progression of slides, the next burst of slides, is not going to be as useful as I thought it might. So you know what? I'm going to skip forward.
Mm-hmm.
That's a small step in the way toward spontaneity.
Right.
Or here's the next step. Have a lot of blank slides or, slides with almost nothing on it. So that when you put the slide on and you say, okay, I'm going to show a burst of slides that's very visual. And then I'm going to go to a slide that's virtually blank. People will look at you. That's a step in the direction of connection. These are all ways to begin to slowly move. Whether, if you can't make the larger leap, which requires both permission to do so and your own comfort with, can I do this? There are baby steps that you can take, but just the important part is to embody the idea.
Got it. Okay, I've got to add another question, but I got to scroll up to get back to it. Give me a second. This is a two-part question. Well, actually, now I've got three questions here. Um, let's see. This one I'll read, but it's one you're going to have trouble addressing, and I think I'll go ahead and address it, or I'll give you a shot and then I'll do it.
Okay.
Someone
okay.
says, I love the ideal of not using a script, but does it fly in the face of the emphasis of Toastmasters and Smedley, who's our founder, on preparation? And that's a question from Philip. So why don't you go ahead and start, then I might reply to it also.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. And the way I look at it, I would go back to this idea of a continuum. You know, on your way in your progression as a speaker, as you move toward mastery, a sort of write and recite kind of model is fine.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. You can, it's a way to step up the ladder and to keep moving in the right direction. I'm just saying is that there'll be some people in Toastmasters at some point who are truly ready for the option of not scripting so much, and may want to move in baby steps or completely abandon it and go toward a model that I've been describing. I don't think they're contrary. I think they actually are supplemental in a way. Complementary maybe is a better word.
Right.
Would you say the same thing? I mean, how would you slice it?
For me, it's a little different in that I still do prepare. I still write out a speech because I want to get the concepts. I want to get those ideas in my head of what do I want to convey. And I work through the process and move things around. But what I try to do, and maybe many people in this audience have seen me speak. I give presentations occasionally at district conferences and at our TLIs. When I am doing rote memorization, that's when I lose my audience.
Yeah.
But what I've done, I typically have an hour and a half to almost 2-hour drive to get to these presentations. I record my presentation, which sounds weird, and then I listen to it while I'm driving, but that's to get those ideas in my head, but not to just repeat them back verbatim. I've just got those concepts where I've sort of locked them in. And when I trust myself to step away from that script, that's when I feel I do best and when I connect best with my audience, because I'm reacting to them in the moment and I'm moving my script around. And again, script's not the right word. The ideas I want to convey are moved around.
Well, can I react to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Well, this is another one of these paradigm shifts where you're playing in the right area. And that is, talking is not the transfer of words. It's not the broadcast of words. Okay. Talking is the transfer of an idea. So here's another option for you, Ken, and people in your situation. I do almost exactly the same thing, but I do it without writing. And I don't listen to a recording of myself. I simply, wait, let me change my language because I don't want this to become a let's copy Scott type of concept. I'm offering a practice that you can experiment with. And it's really simple. For an upcoming talk, if you as a listener, you feel ready to try this, if you feel ready to do it, if it's the kind of place where you feel pretty confident that you can handle it, try to say, I'm not going to write a thing down. You know, slides aren't required for this, and I don't think they'll be of great value to my audience. So let me try this. Speak through the ideas. What people get worried about when they go to talk is they get worried about, can I answer questions? Can I remember what I want to say? And I would say, let's shift that to, can I make the ideas I'm expected to share secure in my mind for download? You with me so far?
Oh, definitely. You've got me thinking about, I've got a speech to deliver next Friday, and I haven't even sat down to start. I've got my broad concepts of what I want to say, and it's something I'd like to try. And you say, if people have a place they can do this, well, that's what Toastmasters is supposed to be about. You've got a safe place to try things.
Yes.
And if it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, great. But that's the role of a club is to give, in my mind, is to give us this safe place to try things and see what works, see what doesn't, maybe get some feedback on, yeah, that kind of worked, but maybe if you did X, that would help you even more.
Yes. Yeah.
Or to just keep practicing it. So to me, it definitely works within the whole arena of what Toastmasters is about.
Good. Well, and let me expand on that practice. So we put this very provocative idea out there, and I don't want people to be, confused. What was he going to say?
Mhm.
And that is, be that crazy person who speaks to themselves. When I want to make an idea secure in my mind, secure meaning I can download that idea at any moment I want to, in any conversation, in any presentation, the idea is secure in there. The words I use can differ from place to place, audience to audience. The words aren't what's important, it's the idea. And think of the idea not as a set of words, but as sort of this thing that has its own shape and texture. It's unique kind of object in a way.
Mm-hmm.
To make that secure for download, you vocalize. You can do it in two ways. You vocalize out loud, right? So you speak as if to others, but you're really speaking to nobody. You're speaking to yourself.
Right.
Or you can sub-vocalize, which is you're just talking to yourself in your head. Now you risk looking crazy to others. They may want to lock you up or put you in a straitjacket. And trust me, my family comes in, I'm in a room sometimes and my wife will walk in and hear Scott's speaking to himself again. But all I'm doing is honing the shape and the texture and the size of this idea. And if I've honed it enough, if I've spoken through it enough, not totally obsessed with the words, but more obsessed with, do I get this idea? Is it mine now? Then when it comes time to do this, what we're doing now, I can download it. It's easy.
Definitely got it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go on to another question.
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, we got a two-part question. So I'll read part one, then we'll go to part two. And that is, some of this we've actually talked about, but let's see if just add a little bit to it. What is the best way to prepare for such a conversational non-script presentation beforehand? Well, actually, I think you've just covered that. When you don't know what the audience wants to focus on or react to beforehand. I think you've kind of answered that. Let me go to part two. Yeah. Let me go to part two because it might give us more to work from.
Okay.
Let's see, part two. Without a script, how do you stay on time? That is a concern. How do you stay on time? How do you cut it off just when the audience is on fire? And that's a question from Lynn.
Okay. That's a great question. I can sort of encapsulate everything from both parts of the question. We already began to answer the first part, which is how do you prepare? And I say vocalize, sub-vocalize. You can write, don't get me wrong. I would say there's a couple things you can write down, or you might really want to write down. One is write down your goal. What's the outcome you want for your audience? What do you want them to believe, and how do you want them to behave as they leave you, right? What actions do you want them to take? Maybe write that out, right? Then you can write out a little bit of audience analysis. I wouldn't overdo this because, again, people change so much over time. If you overanalyze an audience, you sometimes begin to lock them in your mind, and then you're not prepared for who they actually are when you get there.
Right.
So write a few details about your audience. And then the third thing is write your core idea. I like to write the core idea as an if-then statement. It's something like, if you believe that your mind is equipped for a conversational and spontaneous approach to speaking, then you'll be able to walk away being more spontaneous in future presentations. Maybe that's an example of a core idea. So I write those things down. And I like to do that because that's a contract with myself. Because this is what I'm going to prepare for. I got to make sure that, of course, that's the expectation that's set going in. When it comes to the rest of it, it's more a matter of vocalizing and sub-vocalizing. I might make a couple notes of some key ideas that I know I'm going to want to share, but the rest of it is vocalizing and sub-vocalizing. Now, when it comes to going into an audience where it's like, I don't really know what they're going to expect or who they are, how do I handle that? Well, I've been invited to visit a group, let's say. And of course, I was sure that when I was invited that the organizer knew my expertise. So I don't want them to be misled and think that I know something I don't, because that would be unfair to them in the audience. They invite me to come and speak about speaking. And I've done this before. I've gone in with a very, very loose plan. You know, I think that there might be 3 or 4 ideas that I plan to talk about. And then I go in there and approach it in a very conversational way. Now, I'm thinking back to an actual event where I was speaking with a group of learning development professionals, and it was about 14, 15 people in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
I went in with my loose plan and it became a conversation. I totally released the idea of getting through my content. I just totally, completely abandoned that. And I focused on quality. I focused on being in the present with them, listening intently with my ears and my eyes to what they were saying to me, and being in the present and creating meaning and relevance in that moment from what I know, from my expertise. I didn't get anywhere toward the plan I walked in with. It was ridiculous. And actually, you know, I looked up and I go, oh my God, there's only 5 minutes left. And all I did was say, well, you know, let me wrap this up. And I simply wrapped it up. I sort of took what we had talked about and I ended a little bit of an end cap to it. And the feedback I got from that experience was incredible. People were saying this was the most relevant and real presentation we've had in this organization in a long time.
Right.
I hope that exemplifies what you can do. Mm-hmm. People don't care about your script. They don't care that you get through everything. What they want is to be affected by you. They want to walk away with some valuable idea that affects them in a positive way, that they can apply to their life. Focus on that, not getting through your preconceived content. And I'm telling you, even if you don't get through breadth, you will create a great deal of depth for your listeners.
No, definitely get that. Okay, yeah. Let me go ahead and bring up another question.
Okay.
This one's from Vidya. It's a little long. Let's see. How do you deal with it when a question throws you off? If you have a clear narrative to present and then the question comes out of left field, how do you bring things back to your point that you wanted to make while acknowledging the audience, especially if it snowballs with additional unexpected questions? I think it's a lot of what you've been talking about, that you don't need to get locked into that.
Right. Well, so that the assumption behind that question is that what serves the audience best is your plan. Now, if somebody asks a question that's truly out of left field, and I would say that a good example would be they ask you about an area of expertise that really isn't yours. You don't know anything about it. You don't have any secure content to download. Then you can say that and say, well, I understand your question. I'm just not qualified to answer it. I don't have that knowledge. I can try and get it for you and maybe email you about it, or we can have a follow-up conversation, maybe something like that.
Right.
But most of the time when people ask you those questions that come from out of left field, what it's often saying is, it's not within my plan. I didn't anticipate this question. Look at it this way. We talk to create meaning and relevance for the listener. Okay, now meaning means they have some memory association with what we're saying. We're speaking in terms that they understand. Okay, that's meaning. So if you ever walk out confused because somebody uses a lot of very lofty jargon, that's because that speaker is failing to make meaning for you. They want that meaning. They don't want to be confused. They want to understand the meaning of what you're saying. Now, relevance is the importance of that meaning to them. Relevance is how How important is that idea to them in this moment? So I look at those questions when somebody throws me something unexpected. I ask, wow, I thought what might be relevant to them was this. Now I think they're telling me what's relevant to them in this moment is something different. Go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they want. That's why you're there. You are not there to prove that you're the perfect professional speaker. You are there to be in service to your audience, to create meaning and relevance for them so that they walk away with something very valuable. And usually a question that comes out of left field is not a reflection of a crazy audience member. It's a reflection of my inability to anticipate what was relevant to them in that moment.
Right.
So I will say, let's follow the rabbit hole. As long as it represents relevance for the larger audience. Now, I hate techniques, but I'm going to give you a little technique. If your mind says that question might feel relevant to that individual, and they're really what they're doing is sort of making our conversation about them, and the rest of our listeners are not finding it relevant, then I'll say, that's a wonderful question, but let's put that off for after the presentation, and I can speak with you individually. I love to do it, so why don't we do that? But often that person is just a good spokesperson. They don't know it, but just a good spokesperson for the rest of the audience. They're expressing.
Definitely.
Does that make?
I've run into that where there are people that they are representing the audience, and that a lot of times you bump into those that really they just have a soapbox they want to get on, and that's the ones you do have to kind of bring it back to maybe not what you want to get out as much as something that's relevant to the entire audience.
Yeah. And be careful. Don't fight for the soapbox.
No. You lose. The entire audience takes the side of the person beside them. You lose.
Yes.
Okay. Let me bring in another question. Oh, this is a lengthy one. Let's see. How do you deal with it? No, we've already done that one. There we go. Multiple questions about managing anxiety and stress when speaking without a script, since having a script can help reduce nerves. I have to say the other, but that's okay. What are some things I can do that reduce stress and anxiety when speaking to an audience without a script the first time?
Yeah. Well, I want to approach this first by shaking up the question completely, because I think you just made a comment to the effect that it's almost the script that creates the anxiety.
For me, it does.
Yeah. And I sort of agree. It is so interesting to me when I work with a client, and we usually start our work together by having a conversation. You can almost imagine me sitting down, we're sipping coffee on either side of the table. It's almost like we're at a coffee shop. I'm just getting to know who they are and what their concerns are and those sorts of things. And we have a very spontaneous, unpredictable, rich exchange. And then I say, okay, now let's capture some data of you speaking. Let's have you stand up. And what I'd like you to do is just choose something that you find very secure in your mind, something that you find easy to download and speak about it. Then they'll say this, Scott, I'm just not very good about thinking on my feet. And the joke is, I go, what? When you stand up, you suddenly can't think? Is that the problem? Because sitting just now for the last 15 minutes as we've conversed, you have not struggled once to produce words. You've not struggled once to say something meaningful and relevant to the conversation. It's suddenly the moment that you switch into this public speaking mode that you go, oh my God, what am I going to say? And so what I like to tell people is destroy that concept. Public speaking, the concept of public speaking, the paradigm is a separator. It takes speaking, which is a skill in and of itself, and separates it into two. It says there's a public speaking skill set, and then there's a just speaking skill set, and they're different things. They're not. They're not different things. And then people go, okay, I'm public speaking now, and they shift into this mode where even if they try to say, I'm not going to be scripted, I'm not going to be scripted, they understand their thinking habit is, I've got to be very careful about my words. I've got to be very careful about what comes out. That's that write and recite thing that I talked about earlier. It's very insidious. We have such a habit of thinking as presenting in public speaking as write and recite. Even when we consciously say, I'm not going to do that, it's very hard to escape. My feeling is this: when I am mindful, when I am speaking like I am right now with you, I'm in the present, we're in training, we're looping, I'm enjoying the light and the sound that you're giving to me as I'm exchanging with you. I'm so comfortable. I have no sense of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But had I approached this whole event as having a bunch of slides, right now I'd be going, oh my God, we've got about 9 more minutes. Am I going to get through my content? Am I going to remember what I want to say? Am I going to have this incredible flourish at the end? So my advice is, you said it earlier, Toastmasters is the safe place to try. And my argument would be, once you can trust yourself to secure content in your mind by vocalizing and sub-vocalizing, and trust that in the moment when you're truly present with someone, that you can recall the words you want to. You can, well, let's say it this way, you can recall the ideas you want to. When you reach that point, the anxiety goes away.
Yeah.
It just does. And it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I've experienced it, because as I mentioned earlier, I've experienced the, oh my God, what did I have in my script? And just getting stuck. I mean, it was just truly embarrassing, because I was in front of an audience of about 300 people and the brain just shut down. And I did have to convey those ideas. But when I think if I had approached it with the ideas about myself I wanted to present, if I had done that for 2 minutes instead of an absolute scripted speech, I don't think I would have had that problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I know it's a horrible experience. So let's be real. It's frightening. I mean, in that moment, Ken, you're a very gifted and experienced speaker, but for somebody that's new, those kind of moments are terrifying. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is, you don't have to really go that direction.
And that definitely.
If you can reconceive it all, if you can think of this as, I'm just having a conversation, and maybe a conversation with a lot of people, a conversation one too many, then I don't have the burden of being perfect, being perfectly scripted. I don't have the burden. I can't look foolish because I forgot what I was going to say, because that's not the effort. My effort is being with you, sharing, generously and humbly sharing my knowledge with you. And not worrying so much about myself.
Right. Got it. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I've got one here. What is your advice to someone who wants to pursue a motivational speaking as a career? And this is from Babu.
Yeah.
So a motivational speaker.
Yeah. One of the things that I want Babu and anybody who's considering making speaking a big part of what they do, to understand the continuum, and that there's this continuum to mastery. I've got a long way to go on that continuum. Being a great speaker is a constant pursuit. You don't just get there someday and suddenly I'm a motivational speaker. I'm finally there. It's I am always, always, always trying to find ways to be more generous with and more effective with the gift I have to give to people. Okay, so that's step 1. You always are going to get better. You should. If you don't, then stop being a motivational speaker. Okay. 2 is think in terms of motivational speaking as the transfer of provocative, energizing ideas to other people. You have to know your stuff, okay? Not your script, Release yourself from the idea that I have to be very, very good at memorizing scripts. Get that out of your head. You have to think about your ideas carefully, the ones that you're going to share, and make sure those ideas are rich and novel and interesting to your listener. This is where writing actually plays into all this. A lot of the ideas I'm sharing with you today found their birth in writing. I like to write, I do. But I'm talking about writing, say, a blog post. So I have this rich blog that I do these tiny little blog posts, usually, a 1-minute read. And then I'll write longer articles on LinkedIn. But it's there where I think very slowly and carefully about the ideas I want to share. I will labor over that stuff for hours. It's blood, sweat, and tears. But when I switch into, now that I've shaped these ideas, I've honed them, I need to secure them to communicate them verbally to others. I switch back into that vocalizing mode where I talk through it, I sub-vocalize, and I hone the idea in my mind for speaking purposes. So that would be my advice. You have to have rich, novel, wonderful, interesting ideas to share. Make sure that you develop those ideas. And then you have to be the kind of person that constantly challenges themselves to be more masterful at this thing we call speaking.
Yeah. I think the other thing, that if it's all strictly a script, to me, a motivational speaker who doesn't speak from the heart is not very motivational. And if you're not really connecting with your audience and reacting to them in the moment, you're not really speaking from the heart. You're just speaking by rote.
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's what I'd call this lack of congruence. On the outside, your hands, your face, your voice, and what you're saying is all congruent. So you sort of have this outward authenticity going, but inward, you're thinking, God, when is this over? Am I going to get it all through? Can I remember my script? There's no connection between what you're doing on the outside and what you're doing on the inside.
Yeah.
I think that to get to that true authenticity, what some people would describe as that person was passionate, or that whatever that is, I want to be able to put my mind on the message and the idea that I'm trying to get across, not on, can I remember my script, or am I going to hit my time just right? That's when it releases you to be that fully present, passionate speaker that we love to listen to.
Well, speaking of time, we're coming down to the last couple of moments. Let's try one last question, but it'll have to be quick.
Okay.
This one's from Christina, and it's, how do you incorporate humor and props in your speeches to be fully present when you present?
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell you what. One of the things that I did this morning when I was preparing to speak here was I thought, I might actually want to use a prop, a deck of cards. It just came to me in the moment. So I grabbed these cards and I started saying, would be a good metaphor for slides and how we think. I know that these cards have preset stuff on them, but let's say I authored these cards originally. They were my works. Then I go and I talk, and my goal is I've got to get through this and then that, and I've got to flip through this, and I've got to go through that. And suddenly I'm stuck to this script. In the meantime, you're like, God, this guy is just playing solitaire. You know what I mean? The answer to the question is, don't ever try to use humor or props as some kind of technique. If you release that and say, I can be funny if that's a strength of mine. I can use props if I'm inspired to. But I'm not going to grasp those techniques as some kind of survival mechanism to get through this presentation, or some kind of window dressing. Can you use them? Yes. If it comes to you in an inspiration to use a prop, then did just what I did here. I just brought it with me. If you're naturally funny, then go with your gut and tell a joke. But release this idea of techniques, because ultimately techniques ultimately will hold you back.
Yeah, great. Well, Scott, I want to thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and that's what it's been. It's been a conversation, and I hope our audience has enjoyed it as much as I have.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you for being here for us and being our first presentation within our conference, which became a virtual conference. It's going to go on for another couple of weeks. I want to thank you. And what I'd like to do is bring up a slide on our next webinar that's coming up in just a couple of weeks. Our next webinar is with Lisa Wentz, Grace Under Pressure. If you'd like more information on it, whoops, we're jumping slides here. You can get more information about this next presentation at d4tm.org/conference, and there are seats open for that. Just as this presentation, it will be open to as many people who want to sign up for it, and it will be presented over as this one with a Zoom conference, but it will be over YouTube, so as many people want to sign up as you'd like. So please join us for that. And I want to thank everybody and thank Scott again. You all have a great day. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Ken, and thank you for everybody for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Scott. Take care.
Take care.